Imagine, just for a second, that everyone walking around today had a little glowing meter, like floating right above their head. Not a health bar like in a video game, but a worth bar.
Oh, that is a terrifying visual.
Right. And this bar fluctuates all day long.
Mm.
So you send an important email, ding, the bar goes up, you hit your sales quota, ding, it goes up again.
But then you take a nap or, you get sick and have to stay in bed.
Exactly. Or you just spend a Tuesday staring out the window and you can practically hear the sound of that meter draining. Beep, 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 just dropping towards zero.
It really is a terrifying image, but it captures the psychological reality most of us live in. I mean, we walk around constantly monitoring this invisible ledger of our own human value. We're treating our right to exist as something that, fluctuates based on our output.
Yeah, and today we are dismantling that invisible ledger. We have our hands on this fascinating transcript from a series called Time Traveler's Paradox. Specifically, it's an installment titled The Worthiness Trap.
Which is such a great title.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it features this tense, deeply philosophical debate between two characters named Nick and Maya. Our mission today is to explore one of the most uncomfortable, unspoken questions hidden in, like the absolute bedrock of our modern society. Why do we tie human value directly to economic output? And why do we fundamentally believe that suffering proves worthiness?
Yeah. And by the time we reach the end of this deep dive, you might completely rethink how you view your own struggles, like how you look at your job, and even how you introduce yourself at your next social gathering. Because the ideas presented here, they really challenge the very foundation of how civilization currently operates.
Absolutely. So the conversation between these two characters starts exactly where the human brain naturally goes when presented with the idea of unconditional support.
Yeah.
It starts with the concept of fairness.
Right, which is always the first hurdle.
Always. Maya immediately brings this up. She listens to Nick describe a hypothetical society with less fear and more systemic support, and she pushes back hard. She basically asks, why should someone receive necessities without earning them? Like, if one person is running on a relentless economic treadmill, putting in 60-hour weeks, and another person is contributing very little, isn't it fundamentally unfair to just give them both the necessities of life?
Maya is acting as the voice of our current societal norm here, and her reaction is completely understandable. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, we are wired for resource scarcity.
Right. If someone in the ancient tribe wasn't pulling their weight, the whole tribe could starve.
Exactly. So our brains instinctively bristle at the idea of unequal effort resulting in equal survival. But Nick counters this scarcity mindset with an example that just shatters that transactional logic instantly. He asks Maya to consider a newborn baby.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is where the logic completely flips. Imagine demanding a resume from a 6-month-old before handing over a bottle of formula.
Absurd, right?
So absurd. Imagine sitting down with an infant and asking, so what is your 5-year career plan? What are your key deliverables for this quarter? Before you agree to put a roof over their head.
Or think about an elderly person who can no longer work. We don't ask for their recent economic output before deciding if they deserve medical care.
Exactly. Neither the baby nor the elderly person has earned their food or shelter through economic production. Yet society universally agrees they deserve them simply because they are human.
Right, and for a brief, fleeting moment in those specific examples, human worth is completely separated from productivity. We don't even question it.
We just accept it.
Yeah, and Nick uses these examples to highlight a profound contradiction in our civilization. We accept intrinsic worth at the very beginning of life and often at the very end of life, which means our obsession with earning our survival is conditional.
It's not an absolute law of the universe.
No, not at all. We just choose to apply it to a specific, arbitrary window of adulthood.
Which is wild when you really think about it. If we universally accept that babies possess intrinsic worth without producing a single thing, when and why do we suddenly flip the switch? When do we start demanding that adults must earn their fundamental right to exist?
The source text explores this through the lens of the blank slate theory. Like, no child is born believing they must earn the right to breathe or eat or take up space. That belief is an installed program.
A cultural script.
Exactly. As we grow, our subconscious mind acts like a sponge, absorbing heavy cultural narratives. We hear phrases repeatedly, things like, you are what you do, or hard work defines character, or there's that insidious implication that if you are struggling, you must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, and the text also points out that religion has historically played a massive role in reinforcing these scripts. For centuries, various institutions framed poverty as a kind of moral test. They viewed wealth as a sign of divine favor and treated suffering as a necessary path to redemption.
It all layers together.
It does. It creates this heavy burden of proof on the individual.
But wait, isn't it just a biological reality that we have to work to survive? Like, if you look at nature, animals have to forage and hunt. If they don't expend effort, they don't survive. So what does this all mean? Isn't this cultural script just a reflection of natural law? Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Nick brings neuroscience into the debate to answer that exact question. The human brain is this incredible prediction machine, right? It's constantly trying to save energy.
So it builds shortcuts.
Yeah, it takes repeated cultural narratives and hardwires them into literal neural pathways so it doesn't have to evaluate them every single day. But the problem is, the brain is terrible at distinguishing between a biological law of nature and an inherited cultural rule.
Meaning the brain reacts to breaking a cultural rule the same way it reacts to, like, a physical threat.
Precisely the point. Effort is required to sustain life, sure, and every healthy society requires contribution. The text does not deny that gathering food or building shelter takes work, but the cultural script takes that basic practical reality and distorts it.
It twists it into something else entirely.
Exactly. The brain subconsciously absorbs these cultural rules and coats them as immutable laws of physics. We start believing that our value as a living being is intrinsically tied to our economic output, rather than just accepting that gathering food is a practical chore. We confuse the chore with our soul.
Wow, confusing the chore with the soul. That is powerful. Because these cultural scripts are so deeply ingrained, they do more than just dictate our economy. They rewrite our entire self-image. We move from worrying about how society judges us to how we define our own identities. And this leads straight into what Nick calls the worthiness trap.
It alters the very language we use to describe ourselves.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text uses an everyday example to show how deep this goes. Think about how we introduce ourselves.
Oh, this is a great example.
Imagine you were at a dinner party. You're holding a drink, you're making small talk, and a stranger walks up to you and asks, "So what are you?" Or "What do you do?"
The most standard icebreaker ever.
Right. If you responded by looking them dead in the eye and saying, I am an adventurous, compassionate, and deeply curious person, it would completely derail the conversation.
They would probably slowly back away.
Oh, for sure. We are expected to say, I'm an accountant, or I'm a teacher, or I'm an engineer.
And Maya defends this in the text by saying it is completely normal. But Nick challenges her to recognize the difference between something being normal and something merely being familiar.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. Most job titles describe a function, a mechanic, a lawyer, a farmer. But words like curious, creative, thoughtful floofing, those describe human traits. A machine can produce a function, but a human can create meaning. They are not the same thing.
So when we exclusively use functional titles to define our identity, we're basically subtly agreeing to view ourselves and evaluate each other as machines.
Exactly. And the neuroscience in the text backs this up brilliantly. The human brain's reward system, like the release of dopamine and serotonin, it fires for mastery, for contribution, and for solving meaningful problems.
Not just for getting paid.
Right, it doesn't inherently fire for a paycheck. Purpose and productivity are related, but they are fundamentally different mechanisms in the brain.
Nick never denies that contribution matters to human fulfillment, right? He's not saying we should all just do nothing.
No, not at all. The danger arises when economic contribution becomes the sole measure of human worth. When you establish that metric, what happens to the people who cannot contribute in the ways the market demands?
Right, the disabled, the sick, the elderly.
Or the disadvantaged, or frankly just the downright unlucky. They are immediately judged through this unforgiving economic lens. Society defaults to this because evaluating simple metrics like a job title or an income bracket requires far less cognitive load than sitting with the messy, complicated structural realities of another human being's life.
It's intellectually lazy, but neurologically efficient.
Perfectly said.
Yeah, it's much easier to just glance at a spreadsheet than to understand someone's entire medical history or systemic disadvantages. But if we define ourselves entirely by our economic output and our job titles, we inevitably start measuring our human value by how much we struggled to achieve those things. We start glorifying unnecessary suffering.
Oh, it becomes the ultimate cultural
It
flex.
really does. How many times have you heard someone say, or, maybe you said it yourself, I sacrificed everything for this, or I suffered to get where I am?
All the time.
The underlying implication is always that the suffering itself is what created the legitimacy. Like, if you didn't suffer, your success somehow doesn't count.
And Nick dismantles this logic with a series of sharp analogies. He points out that a bridge isn't a better bridge just because it took 10 years longer to build.
Right.
A disease isn't noble just because it causes excruciating pain.
Yeah.
A problem isn't inherently valuable just because it was difficult to solve. Yet humanity constantly glorifies unnecessary suffering simply because we have become accustomed to it.
The subconscious mind just absorbs this toxic equation, like suffering equals worth.
Yeah, and as Nick points out, this is often just romanticized waste.
But hold on, if we remove struggle entirely, aren't we robbing people of resilience? I mean, a lot of people build their entire identities around the hardships they have survived. Doesn't stripping away the value of struggle sort of invalidate their strength?
This raises an important question, and honestly, Maya argues this exact point. People certainly do build their identities around overcoming hardship, but the time traveler clarifies that we have to separate two very different concepts here.
Okay, what are they?
There is a massive difference between respecting the immense strength it takes to survive a hardship and insisting that the hardship needed to happen to prove your worth. One honors human resilience, the other is a toxic justification for a broken system.
Wow, okay. It's like the sunk cost fallacy applied to human trauma.
That is a perfect way to frame it. To admit that your suffering was unnecessary is psychologically devastating. It is so much easier for the human ego to believe the struggle was a crucial, ordained crucible that made you special.
Right, because the alternative is admitting you suffered for no reason, which is brutal.
Exactly. And the time traveler asks a really profound question. If suffering can be reduced for future generations, should it be preserved simply because previous generations had to endure it?
Most people would immediately say no.
Right. So why do our systems continue treating struggle as a toll you must pay to prove you deserve to exist?
Which brings us to the ultimate crossroads of the debate between Nick and Maya. If you pull this thread all the way, if we stop glorifying unnecessary suffering and we actually decouple human survival from forced economic contribution, Maya's ultimate fear is that society will just collapse.
Which is a common fear.
Yeah, it moves the conversation from an individual psychology lesson into a massive question about the future of human civilization. Like, if nobody is afraid of starving, who takes out the garbage? Who does the grueling jobs?
The source text explores this through a really interesting thought experiment. Nick asks Maya to imagine two different societies. In Society A, people contribute and work because failure means hunger. They are driven by the fear of starvation and homelessness.
Okay, the fear-based model.
Right. Then, in Society B, people contribute because they wish to improve themselves, uplift their communities, and understand the world.
But then Maya asks the practical question, right? About the undesirable jobs.
She does. And Nick suggests that in Society B, without the threat of starvation forcing a desperate underclass to do the grueling work, society would actually be forced to innovate. They would automate those jobs, share the responsibility, or compensate them so highly that people choose them willingly. Nick asks, which society produces healthier motivations?
I want you, listening right now, to visualize waking up in Society A versus waking up in Society B. Think about the physical exhaustion of operating constantly from a place of fear. Waking up every day knowing that the primary reason you are going to your job is to outrun ruin.
It's exhausting.
It is. Compare that to the energy you have when you are working on a project you actually care about from a place of purpose. Operating from extrinsic coercion is completely draining. Operating from intrinsic motivation creates boundless energy.
And that coercion limits what humanity can achieve. This leads to Nick's final realization in the text. This is no longer an economic question. It is a civilizational question. He asks, if every human being possesses intrinsic worth simply by existing, what kind of civilization would we build?
Because right now, our civilization is built on the exact opposite premise. It's built on the idea that you lack intrinsic worth until you prove it through economic output.
Exactly. Realizing that human worth is intrinsic separates survival from worthiness entirely. It shatters the worthiness trap. If humanity actually believed that everyone deserved to exist simply because they are human the same way we believe it for a newborn baby, we wouldn't just be trying to survive. We would be building a civilization based on actual human potential rather than just managing fear.
It really forces you to look at the foundation of your own daily motivations, doesn't it? It asks you to audit the way you treat yourself when you fall short of these arbitrary productivity metrics.
It absolutely does.
Well, we've covered incredible ground today with Nick and Maya. We started with the uncomfortable concept of fairness, exploring why we give babies a free pass but demand relentless output from adults.
We unpacked the blank slate theory and the neuroscience of how our brains mistake cultural rules for biological laws.
Right, and we looked at the trap of defining ourselves by our job functions instead of our human traits, and why society prefers simple metrics over complex realities.
We challenged the glorification of suffering, recognizing the sunk cost fallacy of trauma.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate question of what a civilization built on intrinsic motivation rather than fear would actually look like. So I want to leave you with this. Consider your upcoming weekend. When you spend a whole Sunday doing absolutely nothing productive, maybe you just rest on the couch, or you spend hours on a hobby that generates zero income. Do you feel a lingering sense of guilt? Do you feel like you are somehow falling behind?
It's a heavy question.
It is. If you do, consider whether that guilt is actually yours, or if it's just the worthiness trap talking. If your worth is truly intrinsic, like Nick argues in the text, maybe resting isn't a reward you have to earn after a long week of economic output. Maybe resting is just a fundamental, undeniable right of being human.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Time Traveler's Paradox. Next time you find yourself staring out the window, just remember that invisible meter floating above your head. It doesn't actually exist. You can turn it off whenever you want.